Hey everybody, new presentation format. Yay. Hopefully it's more engaging than the one that we've been using so far. All right, so today we're going to talk about a book called Peopleware. It's a book about how to essentially create productive projects and productive project teams. And it gives you a lot of advice on how to interact with people in the workforce, how to hire people, basically all the different types of topics that we've been talking about since the very start of the class. All right, so let's jump right into it. This is a picture of the front of the book. As you'll notice down there in the little caption, the book was written way back in 1987, but that doesn't mean that it's not incredibly relevant up until today. All right, it's been revised in 1999 and 2013, so it's actively still being updated as new and interesting things come up in the world of software. But as you'll see from the very beginning, much of the problems that come up in software development are problems that are based on things that have been around since this beginning of human civilization, and that's basically us. All right, we're the reason why software fails. It's not really a technological problem or a technical problem, it's a people problem. All right, so with that, what we're going to do is there's going to be five main parts to this book. Each one, as far as the book is concerned, is roughly the same length, but we're going to focus more on part 1 and 2, and I think a little bit more on 3. Parts 4 and 5 are much briefer, at least with respect to the presentation. All right, so the first part of this section in the book, it's entitled "Somewhere Today a Project is Failing." All right, and that's going to be true until the end of time, right? Because of the sort of first issue here. Almost all project failures are due to sociological problems. It's a long way away, I think, for us to solve the sociological problems that exist both in society and also in our student teams and our work teams. So as long as those problems are there, software is going to have a problem. It's a very people-centric activity, and people have problems. All right, another issue with this is that the folks that are supposed to manage this whole thing, the managers, they tend to focus a lot of their time on the technical issues because those are the issues that they were trained to handle. All right, most managers came from a technical background, and they don't have a lot of education with respect to how to deal with people. All right, some do, the good ones do. And so my hope is that by talking about this in this lecture, and then also a lot of the other things that we've talked about in the class, you'll be able to work better with people as well. All right, the next one has a really weird title. It's "Make a Cheeseburger, Sell a Cheeseburger." The whole point of this is that software isn't a cheeseburger, so you can't make it like one. All right, people are involved in the process. They have to have room to make errors. When you gauge success on a software project, because of the fact that sociological problems tend to always cause issues, you should gauge success both based on technical progress but also sociological progress, right? Is your team working well together? Are they progressing well as a unit? Are they having any significant issues with each other? And if they are they resolving them? That kind of a thing. You also want to keep in mind that thinking about a problem is often more valuable than simply doing it. We've talked about this with respect to the design phase of a project a lot. Spend as much time as you can doing customer discovery and the design of your solution before you actually sit down to implement your solution. All right, thinking about it is more often productive and valuable than actually sitting down and doing it. All right, and then finally, uniqueness in a team's member is vital to team chemistry, right? For your team to have a good chemistry, they need to have a diversity of views, a diversity of backgrounds and feelings. If everybody's the exact same person, you're going to get stuck with a very monotonous and boring team if everyone is the exact same person, right? All right, the next thing here, it talks about taking care of the team, all right? And this is something that a lot of tech companies, especially startup companies, get wrong, all right? Making people work harder and longer at the expense of their personal lives is wrong, okay? People have to have the ability to take a step back from work, relax, enjoy life, all right? Work is not the only part of life, all right? So If you take care of people and you treat them as humans, they'll take care of you, right? And if you experience a lot of turnover, if you have a high turnover in, the employees that work at your company, or if you notice that as a manager you have people leaving your team all the time, then that's probably a indicator that you're doing something wrong, and those gaps in your team are going to more than offset any gains in productivity you have by forcing your employees to work harder, right? You don't want to work your team until they burn out and then try to get a whole new team, because in the end that's just going to lead to less productivity, because you're going to have to retrain the team and essentially start over in a lot of different situations. All right, the next one, quality if time permits. All right. Quality is something that a lot of times is sort of bypassed, especially when it comes to agile development, because creating something of quality takes longer. All right. But in the end, the way that the book argues is that it's actually going to lead to higher productivity, because if the product that you're creating has higher quality, you are going to encourage buy-in amongst the various people that are on your team. The developers are going to see that you care about the quality of work that they create, and they're actually going to want to put in the effort to continue to make that high quality product. All right. If you ignore quality, you're going to fall into what's called a flight from excellence. All right. And a flight from excellence is going to have all sorts of different issues. Imagine if a company like Apple, for example, didn't care about quality, right? Imagine what Apple products would look like if they didn't have an obsessive devotion to quality. They'd look like, I don't know, most companies are copying Apple now, so they would look like Dells, the Dells of old, right? So anyways, the last little bullet point here is also an important one. If you've ever had to clean up after somebody else's mess, in particular their code mess, you know what it's like to work with quality or not with quality, right? You've realized that quality equates to productivity. If the code that you have worked with is high quality, then you're going to be much more productive when you work with their code than if it's a complete disaster. All right, so the next slide right here introduces something called Parkinson's Law. And this was introduced by a person named C. Northcott Parkinson way back in 1954. And it was intended to be humorous, all right? And it basically states that work expands to fill the time allotted for it. All right, so this is sort of like the procrastinator's motto. If you have more time to do something, work will somehow expand the time that you have to finish it. It was originally intended to be a joke. All right, in reality, this law will not pertain or won't apply to your team, assuming that your team has not fallen victim to this flight from excellence, right? Developers are generally eager to get the job done, just like the managers, right? The managers have the incentive that if the developers don't get the work done, they're going to look bad. The developers, on the other hand, if they have a high standard of quality and they have an incentive to be there, they're not going to try to fill the time allotted for their work with other random stuff, right? They're going to try to get their work done as quickly as they can because they care about the product and they want to move on to the next stage of development. Okay. All right. So here's a little comic. It's kind of hard for you to read, and it's kind of hard for me to read as well. So we have one guy here talking to another guy, and he says, "Hey, so how's that big server update coming along?" And the other guy says, "Haven't started yet. No rush." And then the first guy says, "Oh, there's a huge rush. It absolutely must be done by next month, and it's supposed to take at least three weeks to complete." All right, so the first person's really worried that the server update's not going to occur. And then the second guy says, "Nah, don't worry. You got to factor in how everything somehow always gets done faster on the last day before the deadline." All right, so that's sort of the essence of Parkinson's Law. But clearly the guy on the right doesn't care about the project. He's just sort of like sitting back and whatever, it'll get done the day before. And the first person, he really cares about it because he's getting worried that it's not going to finish because the estimates say otherwise. Okay, so the next one. The next slide here talks about the 7 false hopes of software management and then their responses. All right, so I'm going to leave all 7 false hopes up, and then we'll talk about each response to these things as we move through it. So the first one is that there's some new trick you missed that could send productivity soaring. All right, so there's some new book or some new technique that some person, out there in the Silicon Valley world came up with, and if you do that thing, it's going to make everything go super fast and it's going to be super amazing. Well, the response to that is you aren't that dumb. All right. There's no magical trick out there. If there was, everyone would be doing it, right? There's no magical trick to make productivity soar. There's no software bundle or something that you could just all of a sudden install and everybody in your company is going to be more productive. It doesn't work that way. The next one is other managers are getting gains of 100 or 2%, 100% or 200% or more. Forget that. It's actually just fake news. It's basically tied to number one, right? There's no other managers that are out there in the world that somehow figured out how to deal with humans better than you are, unless you're at some really, really bad company that has horrible techniques for dealing with people, right? Most companies are pretty good doing it. All right, the next one, technology is moving so swiftly that you're being passed by. Nope. Productivity in the software industry has proved by about 3 to 5% a year. All right, productivity does not increase that quickly. Most of it's done through very, very small incremental changes in the tools that software developers use. Agile development, you could argue, was a significant shift in the way that software was being developed, but agile development, as we've already discussed, has its own issues as well, right? So there is no magical bullet that you can somehow make use of to just get rid of all the problems that are there in software engineering. All right, the next one, changing languages will give you huge gains. Languages do impact the implementation, the project, right? But they only implement the project source code, right? They're not going to change the people. You still have to deal with people. You still have people's problems. If you automatically switch to some language like Swift or something that's supposed to be faster, right? It even sounds like it's faster. That doesn't mean that your software development is going to be any better overall, because you still have people writing the software, and people are generally going to be the problem. All right, the next one, because of the backlog, you need to double productivity immediately. No, doubling productivity, you can't double productivity. We already talked about that in 1 and 2. You can't just double productivity, and you can't just add more people to the project either. All right, Brooks' law basically states that the more people you add to a project, the longer it takes for you to finish, because all those extra people have extra webs of communication that you have to get through, and you can't just double the number of people and expect the time of development to decrease by half. It just doesn't work that way. All right, so what you should instead do is reject projects that are like economic losers, and try not to backlog. Okay, it's a myth according to the book. Now, that doesn't mean that you should never have a backlog of work to do, but what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't just continually throw work that you haven't completed into a backlog, because all that's going to do is just make the backlog bigger. What you should try to do is to toss stuff that you know is never going to work, or that's going to lead to sort of significant or even partially significant economic loss, right? Get rid of the stuff that you know that's not going to work and focus on the things that will work. All right, the next one, you automate everything. Isn't it time you automated away your developers? No. Developers deal with the very issue that you're trying to solve under the surface, which is human communication, and you can't automate that away. All right, you can get tools like Slack and Google Workspaces or whatever they're calling it now, but in the end, you still have to communicate. All right. In the book, The Design of Everyday Things, which we talked about a while ago, all right, the design of everyday things brings up the point that no matter how advanced technology gets, there are always going to be certain problems that humans need solved. And one of those big things is communication, right? You're never going to be able to automate away communication completely. You still have to be able to communicate with people. All right. So you can't just automate your developers and not expect communication to be an issue. You have to have the developers there communicating with each other to make the team work. All right, and then the last one is your people will work better if you put them under a lot of pressure. They won't. They'll just simply enjoy it less. All right, that's the basic point there to take away, is that you can't just pressure your team. Work harder. No, they're just going to they might appear to be working harder, but all they're going to do is just make it look like they're working harder, and then they're just not going to enjoy their work at all. Okay, so respect your team. All right, the next set of slides here talks about the next part of this book, and that's the office environment. Okay, and what this does is it talks about various ways that you can improve the working environment for your employees to help them be more productive. All right, so first off, I'm going to start with a quote. There's a million ways to lose a workday, but not a single way to get one back. All right, so the goal here is that you want to do everything that you possibly can to make people comfortable in the workspace so that you don't lose time. You can't get time back. All right, so the first section here, the furniture police. So it makes the comment that modern workplaces tend to be designed like prisons, optimal containment at minimal cost. Now, modern workplaces, like super modern ones, say, the buildings that are being built in Silicon Valley, like right now, they're getting better at this. They're making use of community space and private space and open air architecture and all that kind of stuff. But when this book was first written, that was not the case. Cubicle farms were the standard practice for software developers to live in when they were at work. So if the workers are in this sort of crowded and noisy and gross and disruptive space, it's not worth improving anything in the environment except for that workplace. So what you want to do is you want to try to custom your workplaces to enhance productivity of the team. So the book then offers some ways to do this. So with this, I have a little comic here from Dilbert. So it's titled Cube Farming. There's actually a series of these comics that are connected to this. So you have your little cube farmer. He's the guy in the green overalls. And he looks at this programmer in the cube farm and he says, "Oh, it looks like he outgrew his container. I'll replant him in a bigger container with a door." And then one of the engineers says to Dilbert, "Why do tall guys always get picked?" "I'm sure there's a good reason," says Dilbert. "So why do the tall guys always get better offices?" "Well, because they outgrew the cubicle farm." All right. Anyways, here's the cubicle, a picture of a cubicle farm. If you've never heard of these things before, also referred to as a cube farm. All right. The best place to cultivate depression. All right. No one wants to be in a cubicle farm. They're awful. All right. The next part of this section talked about some observations that were made with highly productive teams and also individuals. So the first part here talks about highly productive individuals. And what they observed in the book is that the best people outperformed the worst people on a team by a factor of 10 to 1. So the best people that were on a team were 10 times better than the worst person on the team. That's a pretty huge difference. The next one is the best performer is about 2.5 times better than the median performer. So if you have 5 people on a team, if you got the person right there in the middle at the solid number 3 slot, the top performer is going to be 2.5 times better or more productive or whatever metric that you want to use than that person at the median. And then finally, the half that's better than the median performers, those folks outdo the other half by more than 2 to 1. Okay. All right. The next thing they talk about in this chapter is something they did called the coding war games. And granted, this was a while ago when they did this, but I would imagine that most of these lessons that they learned still pertain to today's modern work environment. Okay. So they had all these teams that were working on this thing called the coding war games. And in the end, they ranked the teams based on quartiles, right? So the first quartile, they were the best teams, and the fourth quartile, those were the worst teams. And then they corresponded this with the environmental factors that were associated with those teams. And what they found is that the highest performing quartile, the first quartile, they had 78 square feet of dedicated space for work, and the lowest quartile had 46 square feet of space. So the best performing coders had more space. 50% of the best coders said that they had an acceptably quiet workplace, and only 29% of the worst said that. 62% of the best said that they had a acceptably private. It's hard for me to say that word for some reason. Whereas about 20% of the worst, so 60 versus 20. So it was like 3 times more people said they had a acceptably private place to work in. when asked if they could silence their phone, 5 times more people said they could do it in the first quartile than the last, right? 50% as opposed to 10%. Then could you divert your calls? So could you, ignore the call? Now, granted, this was a while ago, right, when people actually got phone calls, but you can think of this as sort of like a distraction that requires your immediate attention, right, or a distraction that you can hit pause on and come back to later. So diverting is 76 versus 19%. So did they have the ability to send their call somewhere else, to divert it to a different person? And then finally, do people interrupt you needlessly? 38% of the best workers said that people needlessly interrupted them, whereas 76% of the worst people said that. All right, so more than double. So those numbers should show you something, right? If you're going to be an effective coder, if you want to be the best at the coding war games, you should have the ability to work in a quiet, private space with no interruptions. All right. Okay, so the lessons learned from this: fix the workplace first. All other problems should come later. So before you decide to switch programming languages or move to a different management system or whatever, work on fixing the workplace first. Make it a more comfortable environment for conducive thought. And then also ensure that there's enough space, quiet, and privacy. I sort of already said this stuff. Uniformity has no place in this view. So if you're coming at this from the approach of the cube farm, you're coming at it from the wrong approach, right? Cube farms have rigid uniformity. What you want to do is try to cater your workspace to the needs of your employees. Okay, so the next slide here talks a little bit about productivity measurements. So, it makes the point here that trying to measure productivity with respect to tech is rather hard to do because tech is in constant flux. But if you don't measure anything, you can't improve anything. So it's always good to at least try to measure productivity in your workplace so that you can at least take a crack at trying to improve it. All right. And then if you have a gut feeling on anything, gut feelings are always improved with some real raw data. All right, the next part of this talks about a concept that I refer to all the time in all of my different courses and even in just general in life, and that's this concept of what's called flow. And as you can see from the definition right here, it's a condition of deep, nearly meditative involvement, a gentle sense of euphoria where one is largely unaware of the passage of time, right? It's when you're right in the middle of the coding and you've just been burning away on this really hard section, and an hour later, 2 hours later, you look around and the sun is set, it's dark outside, it's after lunch or after dinner, and you totally didn't even realize it. You never got hungry. You were just right in the middle of the work and you were completely engaged, right? That type of work productivity is essential to like maintain and respect. So the second bullet point here talks about what happens. So if you are interrupted while you're in the middle of flow, all right, so say that interruption takes 5 minutes, you can't just instantly go back into this state of flow, right? You have a reintegration time or a reimmersion time of say 15 minutes, all right? So the original interruption, which was only 5 minutes, ended up costing you 20 minutes of work because you had to sit around and get back into that Zen state of mind where you're able to just work and concentrate right on the task that you are working on to get back into that flow, right? So it takes work to get there. But once you're there, it's great. So try to preserve that as much as you possibly can. Now, one interesting note that I'd like to point out about this is that music, or listening to music more appropriately, uses a different part of your brain than the part of your brain that you need to concentrate on the types of tasks that are related with flow work, right? Arithmetic, that kind of stuff. So when you're doing those really complex tasks and you're in this state of flow, it's okay to be listening to music as long as it doesn't detract and start to infringe on that part of your brain that is being used by the flow state, so to speak. So you're probably not going to want to listen to a podcast But you can listen to music in general, because it's not, unless it's trying to engage you at the cognitive level, it's not really going to do much to interrupt your flow. Okay, so next slide here talks about various patterns in the workplace that you should consider. The first one talks about how you should tailor your workspace. So when you have teams that are working in your building, you want to make sure that you have both public and also semi-private space, and that for the teams to work in. And then you also have protected private space for individuals. So when individuals are off working by themselves, presumably they're going to be in flow. You want them to be in a private space that's going to have very minimal interruptions. And then when people are working in their teams, there needs to be both public space for them to work in, and then also semi-private space where they can sort of engage and not be disturbed by other people or other teams. You also want to make sure that you have windows. All right. People might complain and say, "Oh, well, how are we going to give everybody a window?" Well, the answer to that is look at hotels. Every hotel I've ever been to, except for some really shady ones that I've been to way back in the past when I was broke, have windows. All right. Every single room, even if it's a window that looks out at a brick wall on the other side of the hotel or something, natural light is important for productivity. If you look at the CSE, the Beister Building on North Campus, every single room in that place has natural light except for a few closets. Even the rooms that are interior, like the big lecture halls, they have glass windows or glass walls or whatever next to the doors that you go in to allow the transmission of natural light into the room, even when nobody's in there, right? Or the lights are off. The interior labs, they all have glass walls, like on the 2nd through the 4th floors. So all the spaces that are in the middle of the building that don't have actual windows that look outside, they still have glass that let in natural light, which is very important. All right, you want to try to incorporate outdoor space if you can. You know, weather permitting, people like to be outside. And even if weather is not permitting, it's still nice to go outside. All right, go out into nature, take a walk in the woods, or just walk across the street or in the park or something. Breathe non-recycled indoor air. It's very important. Humans did not evolve inside of steel cubicle farms. They evolved outside in nature under the sky, right? Maybe we went to caves to sleep or whatever for protection, but we did not evolve indoors, underground, like a lot of companies treat their space nowadays. All right, you want to have things that mimic what people enjoy doing outside, right? Now that doesn't mean that you can't have a dark workplace. Some places are dark. People like the dark, but you know, give them the option, right? It needs to be a tailored workspace that fits the needs of the individuals. You don't want to try to force the uniformity of space on everybody that works there. I remember going to Barracuda Networks in Ann Arbor quite a few years back, and all of the developers were in the same kind of rooms. They had these big, huge open rooms. Now, they had open floor plans. They weren't in cubes, but all the lights were turned off. And a few of the desks had lights on them, which was okay, I guess, but I would imagine that some of the people that were in that room didn't like working in the dark. All right, there should have been a way for them to exist where they weren't akin to cave dwellers. So, anyways, that could be my personal bias on that, but I think it's sort of backed up a lot by the fact that humans got to where we are, not living underground. All right, the last one is public versus private space. Sort of talked about this at the very beginning about how do you want to tailor your space. But the book actually talks about how to set it up in a formal fashion. So if you have a building, you want to start at the very outside where the non-employees exist. And those are going to be, the extremities of the workplace. Those places are public. So if you think about it kind of like a person's house, the first place that you go to in a person's house is like the entryway or the foyer or something like that. And those places are generally public. They're not private. You don't expect any level of privacy there. You know, people's offices, for example, are not right at the front door, at least in most houses, right? You don't just open somebody's front door and boom, you're in their office, or even different, you're not in the bedroom, for example. All right, those more personal spaces are reserved for the interior part of the building, even to like another floor, right? So the same thing should be planned for a company. You start at the public spaces, and then as you get further and further into the interior of the company, that's where you start to see the interior, the more private places. You don't want those private places to be right at the front entrance, because those private places are generally places where people need peace and quiet and privacy, and at the front of the company is not where that's going to happen. Okay, so here's another Dilbert comic. You have a monkey here talking to Dilbert, and the monkey says, "Evolution favors monkeys. Eventually humans will be kept in cages as pets." Dilbert's response is, "Bah, that's never going to happen." And then Dilbert turns around and says, "Impossible. We humans will never allow ourselves to be treated like that." And then he says, "Now get out of my cubicle." Right? So Dilbert is, in a sense, a poor little code monkey sitting in a cubicle in a cage. All right. So the next part of the book is called The Right People. And this is where we start talking about the people that are involved in the workplace. You know, we talked about work in general in part 1, and then the work environment in part 2. Now we're going to talk about the people themselves. So it starts off with discussing what's a good way to interview a developer. And it recommends putting a lot of effort into the following 3 things. First, looking at samples of their past work. So try to get your hands on a portfolio, if you know, of their prior work. Next is to try to test their expertise using a small barrage of test questions. And then finally, audition candidates face-to-face to test their communication skills. In my opinion, communication skills is equivalent to technical prowess, if not more important than technical prowess. You can teach quite easily additional technical knowledge. You can have somebody take a class at a public not a public university, a local university. You can have them take online courses, whatever. They can read a book, God, if they had to. Communication skills, on the other hand, are something that take a lot of practice, and in my opinion, are not something that you can just pick up by reading a book. You have to be able to interact with people. You have to have access to situations where you can communicate with people to practice, basically. So teaching people communication skills is a lot harder. So if you can find somebody with really good communication skills and middling technical prowess, as opposed to somebody with incredible technical prowess and absolutely zero people skills, the person with the people skills is probably the better person to hire, because they're going to have a lot less of those sociological issues that we talked about at the very beginning. All right. Next talks about how to get those right people once you've identified them. So if you're a good manager, you should care most about the accomplishments of their staff, not themselves. People should be deemed professional if they're knowledgeable and competent, not based on how they behave or how they appear. I have a fun little picture here from The Greatest Showman on Earth, which is an awesome movie, by the way, if you've never seen it. And one of the big parts about the movie is that, you know, they put together the greatest show on earth, but the people that are in the greatest show on earth are not what you would expect a normal person to look like. They're very eccentric, okay? And so if you have people like that on your team, don't judge them by that. You want people who are eccentric. You want people that live their life their own way. You should care about whether or not they're knowledgeable and competent, not about how they behave or appear. All right. The next part, happy to be here. So ask your organization this. All right. What annual employee turnover was experienced in the last few years, and how much does it cost on average to replace a person who leaves? All right. If your organization cannot answer those questions, it's going to fail. Okay. You have to have some notion of what the turnover is and how much it costs to replace somebody if they leave. Okay. The reason why is that if you have a lot of turnover, if you have high turnover, people tend toward a destructively short-term viewpoint. Okay. They look around and they see all their friends leaving. They're like, wait a minute. What? Why did she just leave? Something must be wrong here, right? It's like when the rats are leaving the ship, you know that the ship's about to go down. you don't want to be stuck in a ship like that. So you're going to follow all your friends, right? So those folks are going to follow their friends by either quitting themselves, or they're going to have a very destructive short-term viewpoint. They're not going to care too much about their job. So what are some reasons for people leaving? One, a just passing through mentality in the workforce. They're just like, whatever. I'm just using this as a stepping stone to get to Facebook or whatever. Or I'm using Facebook as a stepping stone to get to Google, right? You don't want that kind of mentality to exist in your company. The next one is a feeling of disposability. That sort of goes back to the with high turnover thing. If people feel that their colleagues are being disposed of on a whim, in some cases, they're not going to be very happy to stay themselves. They're not going to want to hang around. And then finally, if people think the sense of loyalty would be ludicrous, like, why would I care about being loyal to this company? They don't care about me. That's also a reason that people are going to leave. If people feel that a sense of loyalty is warranted, they're going to want to stay there. Just like if people feel that the work that they create is of high quality, they're going to want to be around because they want to participate in the high quality stuff. They don't want to be around at a company that looks like a bunch of losers that don't care about each other. All right. The next section talks about growing productive teams. So the previous one talked about how to find the right people and how to keep them. This one talks about how to grow them. And this particular slide introduces a concept called a gelled team. So as you can see right up here, a gelled team is a team that is so strongly knit that the team's production is greater than that of the same people working in an ungelled team. Kind of obvious sounding, right? But the way to look at it is that if you have a team and they're ungelled, let's say that they create one work product per week. A gelled team, they're going to have greater than that. They're going to create 2, 3 work products per week, whatever those work products may be. So how do you figure out if a team is gelled? Well, they're going to have the characteristics that you see right here. First, there's going to be low turnover. People join the team and they never want to leave. It could be the same 5 people that have been on that team for the last 3 years. All right, that's a gelled team. Nobody wants to leave. The next one, a strong sense of identity. They have, like little rituals, or they have a mascot, or they have T-shirts or something. I don't know. If they have a strong sense of identity, they identify themselves as, we are the Viking hackers extraordinaire, or something, like whatever. The thing just said Viking packer. That's funny. If they have an identity, generally they probably have some gelling going on there. The next one is a sense of eliteness. Usually with that sense of identity comes a sense of eliteness. They think they're better than others. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing if a team thinks that they're elite, right? Generally, if they think they're elite, they tend to be, right? It's a well-placed metric. Not a metric, but it's a well-placed feeling, because, it sort of lends itself to them being a gelled team. And as you can see from the first part up here, a gelled team is more productive than an ungelled team. So if they feel elite and they have their own little quirky sense of identity and they have low turnover, then they're probably deserving of that rank. The next one is they have joint ownership of the product. There isn't like one person on the team that thinks that this one piece is theirs and then another person who thinks that piece is theirs and all that kind of stuff. They all sort of have this joint ownership of the product that they're working on. And then finally, something that's fairly obvious is obvious enjoyment, right? If the team enjoys their time being together, then they're probably a gelled team, right? I like to think about it as an example of gelled teams, FIRST robotics teams that are really successful, right? FIRST robotics teams, they're generally in high school. If they're really successful, they'll have T-shirts made for themselves, and they'll have a trailer with all sorts of stuff on the outside, and they'll spend countless hours after school working on their robots, not because they want to win the competition, but because they enjoy being there. And they have all sorts of little quirky things that they all do together. They generally stay on people stay on the team for all 4 years that they're in school. So I think a lot of these FIRST robotic teams that end up being very successful are gelled teams. All right, next slide. This is the opposite of a gelled team, and this is ways to commit so-called team-aside. So how do you get your team to implode, right? So first off is what's called defensive management. You don't want to constantly be managing a team with the expectation that they're going to do something wrong and you're going to have to defend yourself against their failures. All right, that's defensive management. The next one is bureaucracy hurdles. Teams don't need bureaucracy. If you're the manager of a team, try to remove as many bureaucratic hurdles as you can. If you're the teacher that's supervising that amazing gelled FIRST robotics team, you don't want your team to have to worry about filling out the paperwork to enter the competition, or putting together the purchase orders to get parts, or dealing with janitorial services that have to clean up the project room when they're done after a long day of work or whatever. Get rid of all that bureaucratic stuff. Do it yourself as the manager. Take one for the team, so to speak, so that the team can focus on development and being awesome, and you take care of all the bureaucratic stuff. That's what you get for being the manager. All right, the next one is physical separation of the team. Now, in current pandemic times, it's kind of hard to allow that to be the case. So you got to do as much as you can to try to get the team together to work on things. When they're physically separated, it's much more difficult to create that sort of human connection with people. Something that is very unique to being in the same room or being in the same space. All right, the next one is fragmentation of people's time. When people have time that they can commit to the project, try to make it so that it's all synced at the same time. You don't want different people to be working on different parts of the project at different points in time, right? So this basically makes it so that if you had a team that you tried to put together from all the different points on the globe and then expected them to be a highly effective team, it's probably not going to be that successful, okay? Because they're all going to be in different time zones. It's going to be hard for them to get together. They're going to be physically separated, etc., etc. The next one, quality reduction of the product. We already talked about this in the before. If you have high quality in your product, you're going to get high buy-in of your developers. If there's low quality in the product, people aren't going to want to be around, and so the team overall is going to suffer. And then finally, phony deadlines and click control. Phony deadlines, people are going to see right through it. If you just say, oh, we got to finish this in the next week, and everybody's like, why do we have to finish it by Friday? Well, just cause I says, well, you know what? Make the deadlines realistic. Actually put some effort in to do project planning so that you have a reason why the deadlines exist. Click control. This is sort of connected to the previous slide where it talked about having a strong sense of identity and eliteness. Don't try to control the identity or the composition of the team. If you have a gelled team, just let them be who they are. Don't try to force others into the organization if they're not going to fit. Just let the team exist in their gelled form, and they're going to be more productive than anything else that you try to insert in there. All right. The next section here is a little bit funny with respect to the title, but hopefully it'll make sense in a second. A spaghetti dinner. All right. The point here is that when teams are first formed, you want to give them as many opportunities as you can to succeed at something together. All right. Even if it's something as simple as making dinner. All right. When I first started teaching 497, I used to actually have an activity like this in class. So we would have the first lecture where we would just all say hello, and then we'd have the second lecture where we would form teams. And then at the end of that second lecture, when we formed teams, I would try to create an activity that was similar to this spaghetti dinner type thing. The teams had to essentially make something. It didn't have to be connected to their project at all. They just had to make something so that they could experience being with each other and, you know, succeeding at something. Some teams actually made a dinner together and then documented it. Others built something simple. I think one team actually made a beer pong table. So whatever it is, some sort of an activity that can just get the team together so that they can start interacting with each other. Doesn't have to be something huge. All right. The next point, entrust everyone under you and take no steps to defend yourself from them. Pretty self-explanatory there. Trust the people that work for you, and they will in turn trust you back. And then finally, a person you can't trust with autonomy is of no use to you. You shouldn't have to micromanage people on your teams in order for them to be effective. If you have to, then that means that they're going to be a problem from now until the time they leave the company, which will hopefully be soon. Right? You don't want to have to spend your time micromanaging people. You want to give them as much autonomy as possible so that they can get out there and do the work and get out of their way so that they can do it. All right. I think this is the last slide. So this is part 5. And very briefly, it just talks about what it takes to make a fun workspace. So, you've set up your workspace to be really nice. You've found the right people. You've done things to keep the right people. So the last thing that you want to do is you just want to make the workplace fun. People want to have fun when they're coming into work. Because if they're not going to want to come into work, right? It should be fun to be there. So this is sort of a mix of chaos and order. So there's a list here of things that you can do to help create success at your company. So the first thing is to introduce pilot projects. So what I mean by pilot projects are projects that are sort of at their infancy. They're just maybe like little ideas that people have. I think it's Google has this built into their work culture. It's they call it like 10% time or 15% time. It's something like everybody that works there gets a certain small percentage of their overall work week to do whatever they want. Some sort of a pilot project that's connected to the company, but it's not, critical to anything that they're actually doing. And I think that's how Gmail got started. Gmail was one of these 15% time projects, and it just so happened that it was really successful and really useful. People loved working on it, and so they ended up turning it into a real product. The next one is competitions. Try to have some form of a hackathon or an event where people can code up against each other, a coding war game like we saw at the very beginning of the lecture here. It's fun. People can relax, kick back, put the skills that they have to the test, and try to win. The next one is brainstorming. It's always good to get your teams together and just brainstorm new and interesting ideas, directions that the company can take, that kind of stuff. And then finally, training, trips, conferences, celebrations, and retreats. Build in some form of non-work celebratory activities into the culture of your company. And people are going to just enjoy being there more. All right, so the last bullet point here on this slide then, there's a need to constantly breathe life back into our work. We spend way too much time in our lives working to find it a drag. Okay, you don't want your work to be a drag, you want it to be fun. And then I'll end it on that little Dilbert comic that you can see right here. So one of the engineers is being shown a gigantic, what appears to be a mushroom hut. And the boss tells the engineer, now that you're out of the loop, your new cubicle will be a giant mushroom. And he says to continue, it's a pleasant environment except for when the mushroom gets its nutrients. And then he's inside of his mushroom hut and he says, nutrients? And then a cow comes up. So presumably the cow is going to go to the bathroom on that there mushroom. So you don't want to be that poor guy getting stuck in a mushroom hut. You don't want to be the manager putting people in mushroom huts. Okay? You want people to enjoy being at work and be happy to be there. All right, so that's the end of the topic for today. And hope you like the new format here with the big old window and me sitting off to the side. That's all I got for today. See you later.